your what we done started. Look at what we done started. This the people party.
Peace and love, party peoples. Talib Kweli is your host of the People's Party. Welcome back to another fantastic edition of the People's Party. Of course, and as always, I have my lovely and talented co-host, Jasmine Lee. Give it up to Jasmine Lee.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Jasmine, how you feeling?
I'm feeling real creepish today. Got my TLC fit on.
I know you look like you about to just do the dance. You
Yes,
look very comfortable.
I've been practicing.
I like that outfit.
Thank you.
Today should be a special episode of People's Party. And today's guest is why I do this. Today's guest is, we have a lot of guests that people know and people are excited to meet, but today's guest represents the people's part of the People's Party. Mm-hmm. And not to say that she don't turn up and get lit, because I know she do. But you know what I'm saying? She has represented the people so well. She's a friend of mine. She is very important to the culture. She's absolutely one of the most important activist voices of our generation. She's a founder of Dignity and Power Now. She is one of the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, which is one of the most important political social movements of our time. A beautiful, special person. People's Party. Give it up for Patrisse Cullors. Gorgeous woman. How you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be here. Good to be in my own hometown, Los Angeles.
That's right. You are from Los Angeles.
Born and raised. I've tried to leave many times, but
okay. Now, growing up in Los Angeles in the 80s and the 90s had to have a huge impact on your activist work.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
Well, LA is massive. So LA County there's LA City and LA County. LA County is 10 million people. LA City is about 1 million people. I grew up in LA City, and I really did grow up in the height of the war on drugs, the war on gangs, over policing, the bad LAPD battery ram, and as a child, you kind of, even though something doesn't feel right, it becomes normal. And so that was sort of my childhood, witnessing police, stop and frisk my siblings, mostly the boys in my neighborhood. By the time I was 12 years old, pretty much all of us were being pushed out by gentrification and law enforcement. But every boy in my neighborhood had either been arrested, killed, or in prison. I think the first time I remember a young boy who was 12 years old got life in prison. And that was just every day. And then I got shipped off to white schools because I got labeled as gifted. And when I ended up in those schools, there were no police.
Oh, wow. Right.
No
you
police.
Sort of stark contrast.
Yeah. And I was like, I remember the first time I had ever sort of had this visceral reaction to no police. I went to my homegirl's house. She was like, I want you to come to my house in Sherman Oaks. And she was like, I want you to meet my brother. She opens the door, and her brother has every single drug you can ever imagine on the table.
Yeah, I was called gifted and went to white schools too, so I know this life that she's talking about.
I kept my gifted with the black students.
Yeah, you don't know no better though.
Right.
They kind of ship you off. But this dude had every drug under the sun, and I was like, where are the police? Because my folks have a nickel bag, and they're being totally roughed up, beat up. And this dude is selling heavy drugs, and nobody's here.
Now, your brother, you were talking earlier about seeing young men of color and being brutalized and abused, not just in the streets, but in the prisons.
Yep.
Is it accurate to say that your younger brother,
my older brother,
your older brother was brutalized in prison?
He was, yeah.
This had to also have an effect on your activism.
Oh, it changed my worldview because while, especially when you're black and you're poor, you grow up really fearing the police and you grow up being told, I remember my mom being like, the police are behind us, don't look back, right? No attention. Right. If your tags aren't on, taking all the side streets.
Tags, that's like a horror movie for black people.
Listen, I'm never driving appropriately. And I always, every time a police, even if I'm not in the driver's seat, my heart starts pounding.
Absolutely.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go to jail.
It's called PTSD.
It's like when you see that movie Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie. To me, that's a horror movie, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the monster is the cop.
Yes.
Because They're
Yes.
going through this whole situation where this white man is trying to steal their souls, right? But when I went to the movie theater, the part where the people gasped the most is when he turned around and he saw
And
them,
you see the
them lights.
police.
Everybody in the theater was like,
Right.
Jordan said he was gonna do that, sort of kill him, and then realized like he was gonna switch it up. But it's true, because the minute that came out, I was like, I'm done. I need to walk out the theater.
yeah, that's the scariest part. But yeah, back to what you were saying.
But so my brother was 19 when he was incarcerated in LA County jails. He had been in and out of juvie, and his sort of incarceration as an adult started inside these jails here in Los Angeles, and he was also diagnosed in the jails. We have the largest mental health population inside LA County jails. It's the largest mental health provider. So he was 19 years old. He gets diagnosed, and he gets brutally beaten by the sheriffs. And I remember thinking, someone's gonna fight for my family. This is
Obviously
wrong.
this is wrong, right.
Exactly. But it was literally the opposite. Not only did they not fight for my family, they hid my brother for almost 60 days. So we couldn't find him for 60 days. We didn't know if he was alive. We didn't know really what had happened. And when my mother, when she finally saw him, he was emaciated. He was totally drugged up on psychotropic drugs. And she came home, and she didn't say much, but you just know when your mom's not okay.
Right, that's the worst feeling. Too.
Exactly. And that was that moment for me where I was like, oh, they're not trying to save us. Like, we are actually targets. And that switched everything for me.
You at some point became executive director for the Coalition to End Sheriff's Violence in Jails, which is a very specific, you know what I'm saying? There's a very specific social justice thing. Obviously, your brother had something to do with that.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that was pre-BLM. So I was taking on the police before Black Lives Matter, and that was local police, and it was tricky because the sheriff's department, if people don't know, it's the Wild Wild West.
Right.
We talk a lot about LAPD, but the sheriff's department is the department that at a Christmas party, they pulled out guns on each other. It's the same sheriff's department that has neo-Nazi gangs inside. This is not hyperbolic anymore. This is facts. And so I took on the sheriff's department with a bunch of survivors of state violence because I had read the American Civil Liberties Union 80-page report. And the report was basically my brother's story. And it was 70 sworn statements from both prisoners, but also from a jail chaplain, a nurse, and someone who was visiting the jails, like a sibling visiting his brother, that ended up getting beat up by the sheriffs. And so there was
the sibling visiting the brother, not the one actually incarcerated.
No, the sibling visiting the brother got beat up by the sheriffs. So this became, I read this report and I was like, I want to do something more than just a legal suit. I was glad that ACLU was suing. And I got a bunch of us together, and we've done a lot of things. Number one, we got civilian oversight of the sheriff's department. They never had any independent oversight. And then just most recently, we stopped 2 jails from being built here in Los Angeles.
Let's give it up for that.
Congratulations.
Word up. When I read about you, and I do read about you often, you're identified as a queer activist.
Yeah.
For people who don't understand sort of the evolution of how the LGBTQ community identifies, can you break down what queer is?
Yes.
Okay.
So I came out at 15 years old in high school, and was lucky enough to have a peer group that was also coming out and learning about themselves. And then I had a real support system of mentors who helped shape my queer identity. And very early on, I was reading folks like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, really learning about my identity through these iconic Black women, and that shaped me. And I think, in the LGBTQ movement, it's always the movement that's left out of the larger conversation around civil rights movements, and but it's the movement that has really charged so much forward, whether around sexual orientation or gender expression. Stonewall, it's its 50th anniversary, and with Stonewall, the first riot with queer and trans people happened there, and it was mostly trans women of color. And so this community is a community that's been near and dear to my heart. And when we started Black Lives Matter, Alicia, Opal, and I, we were really clear that we wanted to have a movement that was at the intersections. Right. That Black civil rights are queer rights and queer rights are civil rights.
Could you clarify the difference between queer and just gay or lesbian?
Yes,
because
of course. Yeah, I mean, I think with queer, it's actually a politic. So you can actually be straight and queer. It's about how you see the world. When lesbian and gay is very specific, you know, it's when you're lesbian, you're in love with women. When you're gay, you're in love with men. But queer is actually a broader term. Some say it's an encompassing term of the entire, you know, LGBTQI squared. There's lots always being. I think every year there's like a new
one.
A new
thing.
letter. And I'm like, wait a-
But queerness is less about. It's not just about sexual orientation. It's about a worldview.
Now, you said you came out at 15.
Yeah.
You had family issues at that time, though.
Yes, my family's Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah,
So you were put out the house.
I was pushed out the house.
Pushed out the house.
My mother likes me to correct that.
Okay.
My mom likes to say she didn't kick
Right.
me out either. But
Oh,
she
my mom
did.
always says.
So
I
you
didn't-
dealt with these same issues.
Oh,
as
I
well?
wasn't kicked out because I was gay. I was kicked out because I was just, you know.
Wilding out.
doing the most.
I love it. I was slightly, almost maybe to the point of doing the most, but I was
Slightly, almost maybe.
I was a good kid. I graduated with honors. Come on.
Boom, boom. No, my mom pushed me out. And, you know, I remember the last conversation before I left the house, which was, you can't live in my house if this is how you're going to be. For her, she's like, I didn't kick you out.
She let you make a choice.
Yeah.
It was a choice.
And I was like, I don't. This is not a choice for me.
So you're a teacher. I didn't mention. Did I mention that in the intro?
No.
I didn't mention teacher. She's a teacher, professor. Excuse me. Both my parents are professors. My brother's a professor, so I have an affinity for teachers and
Yes.
professors. And you teach social justice,
I do.
which can be tricky in today's college environment, right?
Yes.
There are people who say that many of today's college campuses are too PC.
Yeah.
And that social justice, there are people who, and this is not something that I agree with, but there are people who, I think there are nuanced points that could be made.
Yeah.
That some people utilize social justice or weaponize it to have control over other people. Is this a real concern?
I think what we're seeing on college campuses in particular is we have to remember a lot of the young people who are on college campuses are literally they grew up in these movements. So when I go speak to students, they're like, I was 12 when Black Lives Matter started, and I'm like, oh my, you are raised in this moment.
Right.
And so their viewpoint is really strong, and I think they're trying to individuate and trying to figure out what their relationship is to movements.
Right.
I mean, that argument around like it's weaponized on campus really comes from a conservative argument, I believe.
I agree.
I went to HBCU. Shout out to Florida A&M University, and I love like how we were able to speak out on things that were going on. I don't know if you're familiar with Dream Defenders.
Of course.
Okay, so Philip
That's my-
Agnew
yes,
from
that's my boy.
FAMU. Okay, so he started that, and that was like right before the
Yes.
BLM came or whatever, and that derived from FAMU's campus. And I was just like so blessed that we were able to fight the fight and not
Yes.
be torn down or like be censored or
Exactly.
PC'd or anything like that.
Exactly.
Shout out to FAMU, by the way. That's where Dead Prez, Stick and M met.
Oh,
And Dream Defenders came out of FAMU. And in 2013, around the time of Trayvon, when Trayvon Martin was killed, I was dropping an album called The Prisoner of Conscience. And because the album was sort of a play on words, because me as a conscious MC, sometimes I feel like people try to put me in a box or a trap.
Yes.
But at the same time, as I'm putting out an album for sale on iTunes or with a barcode called Prisoner of Conscious, I'm known as a conscious MC, but I'm like, I can't put out an album called Prisoner of Conscious and not really be connecting with actual prisoners of conscious. So I got with Monifa Bendelli and Rosa Clemente, and these are my friends who are activists who since I've been in, particularly Malcolm X grassroots movement people, since I've been doing hip hop for a living, they have made it their business.
Yes.
To come and further politically educate artists like myself. And back in the days, it was me, David Banner, Common, The Roots, J. Rooter Damager, Yasin Bey, people like that. I went to see Mumia that year. I went to see Harry Belafonte that year.
Yeah.
And when I went to see Harry Belafonte, I asked him, I said, how can I get more involved in, sort of these movements? How can I be more like you,
Yeah.
Mr. B? And he's like, go to Florida and go meet the Dream Defenders.
Yeah. Yes.
And this is what he told me.
That's amazing.
So I took my son Amani, and we went down, and Phil picked us up from the airport.
That's
And I
amazing.
stayed in the Capitol building in was it
Yes.
In Tallahassee.
in Tallahassee. I stayed overnight. I met people that ended up being like sort of my teachers in this,
Yeah.
right? So when a year later, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Phil Agnew was one of the first people I reached out
Yep.
to. And J. Cole went to Ferguson.
Yes, he did.
And he called me before he went. He was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? He was like, I just want to show face. I want to show that I'm with the
Present,
people.
yeah.
And when J. Cole called me,
Right.
and I was at home tweeting. You know what I'm saying? And J. Cole called me talking about, I'm going to Ferguson. And I
Yeah.
was like, what the fuck am I doing?
I need
Yeah.
to do something too.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
I'm Talib Kweli.
Right.
So, you know what I'm saying? Like, so I went. And when I went and I got there, and the first person I linked up was Phil Agnew, and he plugged me in with Tory Russell and Tef Poe, and I ran into you.
Yep.
And I saw you. And that's when I knew I was in the right place. How did you meet and link up with Opal and Alicia and start Black Lives Matter?
You know, Alicia and I have known each other now for almost 15 years. We actually met on a dance floor. Both of our organizations were having like a meeting at the mine to talk about, at that time, Bush was in office, Bush Jr. And so we were trying to talk about what we were going to do about climate change around Black folks. And she had just started her organization. We were in Rhode Island, and her org told her, you know, her like hazing basically. It was like she needs to like dance her ass off. And, like it needs to be the first one up.
I
the
told you
last
they
one to
turn up and
sleep.
get lit. That's what I'm saying. Like she brought the people part, now we have the
You gotta
party
be
part.
able to do both. You really do.
And so
Moderation.
we danced all night together and became like siblings that night. Opal, I literally didn't meet until we started Black Lives Matter together.
Okay.
We met online.
Online.
We met online,
Right.
and then we met for the first time in Ferguson.
Okay. So
So-
it was like, it started as just a hashtag,
It
right?
did. It started as just a phrase. Alicia
Right.
said it
On Facebook or
on
something.
Facebook. Then I put a hashtag on it, and then really quickly internally, just in our sort of circle, folks were like, "Oh, Black Lives Matter."
It makes so much sense.
Exactly.
On a visceral level, on a
Exactly.
movement work level,
And we needed to hear something like that.
especially in those
that
moments.
connected us together.
Exactly.
Right.
That
When we're
everybody
seeing-
could yell out. It was simple.
Right.
Yes.
And obviously, if you're Black, you know that police brutality and has gone on undocumented for years.
Yep.
And you know just from being in the communities. But now we're seeing the first generation of people who have cell phones
Yep.
and camera phones.
Exactly.
With that they could capture everything. So now the things that we've been saying amongst ourselves and to the world, excuse me, that the world has been looking at us and saying, you're lying.
That's right.
We were able to show it. And so at that time frame, the idea that our lives mattered, it triggered a lot of people.
Yep.
But a lot of people bought into it quickly.
Very
When
quickly.
you created that hashtag, did you understand how many people it would speak to?
We created the hashtag on July 13th. On July 15th, I wrote, "Hey everybody, Alicia and I are starting this thing called Black Lives Matter. I hope it reaches more people than I can ever imagine."
And it did.
So it was a hope.
It was a hope.
So you guys keep speaking about Ferguson, and that's Mike Brown was actually the reason why I got arrested, because I was protesting out here, and I was kind of the same thing like Talib. I was seeing Philip Agnew out doing all this stuff, and I was just literally complaining about bullshit. And I was like, let me get up and get out and get arrested with
Yes.
everyone else, and that's
Yes.
what I did. But when we were protesting, like the police were attacking us, they were like breaking our phones, and
Yep.
like, what kind of things have you went through when you're like starting the movement, and tell us a little bit about where you find your strength to keep going, because we know
Absolutely.
it's not easy.
Yeah, I think, I knew a lot about movements before BLM. I just didn't know that I was going to help start the next iteration of one of the most powerful movements. Like I studied the Panther Party, I studied the Chicano movement, I studied the Korean independence movement. And what you know from all those movements is that people power will save lives, will change the world, but then there will be a great repression that happens, whether it's police or the state. That piece, I didn't fully understand the repression piece because I had never experienced it. And so when the police raided my house got raided twice when we first started Black Lives Matter by LAPD. They were tracking everything. Obviously, white supremacists were coming after us. I think part of what I started to realize is we need to be closer. You know, our movement needs to be closer and stronger, and they only behave that way when they know that you're vulnerable. And so we started to come together as a team, you know, folks in our movement. And just you naming all the names like Tef and Tori, it's just like bring a lot of, you know, warm feelings because we, and in some ways we're
I
sort
feel
of
like that's my family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are family. We've seen things that nobody else has seen.
Yeah.
Tef and I got arrested together during Ferguson October at a Walmart action, and you know shared a jail cell. And so there's just so many moments where I really sit back and I'm like, we've put our bodies on the line for this.
Now, speaking of getting arrested, you know, that's a tactic and a strategy, right?
Yeah.
Dr. King and them, you know, they were like getting arrested and then using the TV for sound bites.
Yes.
Ferguson, feel like Cornel West came down there to get arrested.
Yes, he did.
You know, and that was part of the tactic,
Yes,
right?
yes.
After meeting Tef and Tori, I felt like I wasn't doing enough, and that's why I started the Action Support Committee.
Yes.
And you know, I asked them what people on the ground needed,
Yeah.
and they said we need money. They said there's money coming in from charitable organizations
Yeah.
that's not reaching people on the ground.
Absolutely.
So I started this fund, and then some conservative blog. My fund, my goal was $10,000. Some conservative blog latched onto it to criticize me,
Yeah.
and because they did that, it went up. And so now it's like $100,000 went into this account. So now I'm terrified.
Right.
What do I do with this?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not gonna Wyclef me out here. You know what I'm saying?
No, not Wyclef.
I'm not gonna do me like that. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like,
I remember.
yeah. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm not prepared for this level
Yes.
of activist work,
Yes.
right? I'm not a bank. I'm
Right.
not.
I didn't go
I
to
don't want to
class
be
for this.
responsible
Right.
for this
Right.
money. So I called Tef and I called Tef and I called Phil Agnew.
Yes.
And Tef put me in touch with some Ferguson people. Phil Agnew was from Dream Defenders, was actually like, you know, you should reach out to Patrice. And I reached out to Patrice and Rosa and some other people. And we formed a coalition. At first, it was larger.
Yes,
If
it
you
was.
remember, there
Yes,
was
it
like,
did. Of
it
course.
was like 15 people that got
Right.
whittled down to like 5 people.
Yes.
But it was people that, and Patrice was one of these people that I spoke to try to get advice for how to
Yeah.
make sure that everything was
Spent
above
accordingly.
board and
Yeah.
I was going to the right place. And you know what? There were mistakes made in that process. I learned from doing that why people don't do that work.
Yeah.
Because it's hard work.
Exactly.
And because people hold you accountable for
Absolutely.
shit and people want to put things on your head and not everybody is built for that. I felt like I was uniquely built for that.
Yeah.
Um,
You did an amazing job.
Thank you. You know, it's all
clap it
praise
up.
due to the Most High.
Yeah, you did an amazing job.
But
Good job.
you know, I just say that to say, with Black Lives Matter in Ferguson, it became a point of contention.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of people, friends of mine, friends of Tef, who started being very critical of Black Lives Matter in that community. One of the main criticisms that came out of that was that Black Lives Matter, which started as an organization to help fight a problem that was disproportionately affecting young black males. Now when you go to the website, we're talking about all types of other things. In particular, we're talking about queer issues. And people said that, and this is a criticism that I do not agree with,
Right.
but people said that Black Lives Matter fooled us and are using what's happening to young black men to push the homosexual agenda.
Yes.
What do you have to say to people who say that?
Well, that's bullshit.
Obviously.
Because, you know, and I always talk to folks, I don't talk to all the folks who say this, because some folks are just saying it like, and just ignorant, and like, they don't mean malice, right? I remember being in an Uber, and this brother, I was with my partner, and this brother was like talking, and then I think Black Lives Matter came on the radio, because, you know, we were on the radio for a long time.
Yeah.
It was not Trump on the radio. And he was like, oh, Black Lives Matter. And he said, you know, the gay agenda. And I didn't say shit to him because I was on my way to the airport and I don't know who he is. But I listened to this and I was like, oh, he really believes this. Like, he really believes that, you know, the black women who started BLM are, first of all, I don't know what a gay agenda is. So there's that. But are like tricking or fooling people. And my response has been, for the majority of our work has been showing up for black men. Like if you think about who Black Lives Matter has elevated and the stories we've elevated,
Right.
the
and it's
majority.
Trayvon Martin and it's Michael Brown
Exactly.
that brought this movement to the forefront.
Exactly. And that's been sort of the forward facing. What we've tried to do, and I think we've done a good job at, is remind people that patriarchy and homophobia exist in Black communities.
Right.
And that we actually have to tackle it if we're talking about true freedom.
What do you have to say to people who say that homosexuality is something that is not Black and not African, is something that derived out of Europe and is an agenda to weaken our communities?
I always say that that is actually like white supremacist framework. That Christianity, white Christianity, because we have to remember that Christianity didn't just start in Europe, but white Christianity really framed queerness and gender variance as something that was evil. That really came from those are their talking points, and we're unfortunately using them.
I honestly had no idea that people were saying that Black Lives Matter was used
It's a
to
thing.
push
It's
the
a
gay
big
agenda.
thing.
And I don't know if that's because my friends are just so forward that they don't think like that, but it's just like, that is a part of civil rights or whatever. Like, it's not, I have a problem when people try to say it's the same thing, because yes, you can walk out the door and people don't know I'm a lick of vagina, but they
Right.
do know I'm a Black woman.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't hide that. So, I'm sorry.
No, but that's exactly right.
But no, seriously, so it is two different things, but it's like you can't, the same thing we just talked about, you cannot be for equal rights if you're not for all equal rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my issue with it is just the erasure. It's
Absolutely.
like the idea that somehow if someone is a gay person, that they don't experience the same racism. And I'll be honest with you, I'm someone who's raised in a patriarchal society. I'm someone who's raised to be a sexist. I'm raised to be a homophobe. I remember the first time I ever had to deal with my homophobia in real time was in college. I'm going to New York University. I'm working at Shakespeare Company Books in the heart of Greenwich Village.
Yep.
And gay people are coming in the store. Gay men are coming in the store all the time. And I was working the coat check part, and gay men are flirting with me
Right.
in the store. And it fucked me up.
Yep.
It made me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I had to examine that
That's how
early
women
in my
always
career. Like,
feel,
well, why
though.
do I feel so uncomfortable? What is it about me that makes me feel so insecure because this guy happened to flirt with me? And I had to deal with that. Growing up later, doing movement work, especially in Ferguson, in Tallahassee with the Dream Defenders.
Yes.
And then Ferguson, what I noticed, I've been doing movement activism for, work for a long time and aligning myself with people for a long time, movement people for a long time. I never paid attention to the homophobia in the movement because I never had to.
Yes.
Because I'm not a gay person, so it had no effect on me.
Yes.
Going to these places in Ferguson and Tallahassee, queer women, gay women, Black women, I found were at the forefront of these movements.
Absolutely.
That's not a scientific thing I'm saying. I'm just telling you my anecdotal
saw.
experience.
Yeah.
That's who I saw on the front lines.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I'm a straight Black male, so I was there. I saw Muslim people, Jewish people, Christians, people from all walks of life, Latino people, just everyone. But the people I saw at the forefront of it were queer women.
Because you have to fight two fights, and it's like if you're already used to fighting, it's not gonna be it's gonna be that much more of a oomph to get in and fight over
Absolutely.
everything, because you're used to it, you're stronger because you have to fight every day. And especially in places like Tallahassee, it's like the gay scene is totally underground. It's not just like, oh, let me just go be gay in Tallahassee. It's like it's a whole nother life that you have to be like introduced into, where you can be yourself and be comfortable. You can't just walk around be like that.
Yeah, I tell homophobes all the time when I'm on social media a lot, and they be like, "Well, it's the gay agenda with Black Lives Matter." I'm like, when I was in a place like Ferguson, I saw Black Lives Matter. I saw LGBTQ people. I didn't see you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you weren't there. Like, can you walk us through? If this is important for me, the Black Lives Matter guiding principles, because I feel like if people who criticize Black Lives Matter are people who've never been to the website.
Absolutely.
People who don't understand what the guiding principles are.
Yeah. I love that you're asking. No one asked about the guiding principles. So we really took the guiding principles from, inspired by the Panther 10-point program. And we created those guiding principles because Darnell Moore, who's a Black gay man, and I we actually organized a trip to Ferguson. We brought over 600 Black folks on buses from across the country to Ferguson during about 10 days after Mike Brown's murder. And we were trying to grapple with these questions, like we're about to bring a bunch of people together that don't know each other. We put it online, you know. We wanted to create a set of principles so that when we get on this bus together and we get on the ground, we all had a clear sense of what we were doing and how we were doing it together.
Code.
Exactly. And it really came from us being, we wanted to make sure we were checking homophobia at the door, transphobia, sexism. We wanted to be really clear about how we understood Black family. And so when we started BLM, we knew very clearly that this wasn't just a domestic movement. We weren't just talking about Black Americans. We were talking about Black people across the globe. And so the guiding principles really lead with, we are a global Black family. And for people who don't know the history, you know, the kind of civil rights movement framework was really a strategic framework. It was to get Black folks to not think of ourselves as a part of a global family. And many other, that's very rare because other cultures see themselves a part of a diaspora. So we wanted to reinvigorate that idea of the Black diaspora. We wanted it to be really clear that if you were homophobic, if you were transphobic, that this probably wasn't going to be for you. So you shouldn't hop on this bus ride. And if you are ready to deal with your issues, then this is the place for you. So our guiding principles were really about a set of standards. They're really about, you know, they helped us also vet people.
Right.
And
that's very important.
Very, very important. And, you know, but at that point, none of us were visible, you know, and I think folks were like, we asked people if we can come to Ferguson first. We were very principled. We were very organized. We said, you know, what kind of people do you want to come? We just didn't bring all types of people. We brought doctors, we brought nurses, we brought teachers, we brought lawyers, we brought youth advocates, and it was very clear that folks needed way more infrastructure on the ground, and we needed to make sure that with whoever we were bringing, we're not going to act a mess in this place that was a war zone.
Right, right. Going back to how the Black Lives Matter hashtag touched so many people. A big part of the confusion, I think, with Black Lives Matter in the year of Mike Brown was that there were a lot of people who were invigorated and activated to become activists. And I think the Ferguson uprising, to me, is one of the greatest examples of people power in the world. Absolutely. Because you had people who were not activists who became that. And then you had social media adding to it. And so now you have people using the hashtag who don't know you, who don't know the guiding principles. They just feel like Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that makes sense to me. So I'm going to use the hashtag. There are people who are famously associated with Black Lives Matter who were documenting the work. DeRay McKesson, Sean King, these people were using Black Lives Matter hashtag. And then when they would be interviewed, people would refer to them as Black Lives Matter activists. Absolutely. And I know that Sean started his own thing at some point. I know DeRay at some point put out some tweets like, I respect Black Lives Matter, but I'm doing, my thing. Why do you think, was that on purpose that there was so much confusion around who Black Lives Matter was as an org and who was just using the hashtag?
Purpose by like the powers that be, or?
Yeah, because it just seems like, to me, from my perspective,
absolutely,
if you cared enough,
you would
know. I got respect for Sean, I got respect for DeRay, but I knew they weren't Black Lives Matter. So when I saw people trying to say, I don't like DeRay because of X, Y, Z, and he's a Black Lives Matter activist, I'm like, that seems purposeful.
Absolutely.
When I saw people criticize Sean and be like, I don't like Sean King. Sean King is not really Black, even though he has told us a story. And, people try to do all this stuff with him. And again, I have respect for him. But then when they try to tie it to Black Lives Matter, to use whatever issues they had with him, I felt like it's too easy to know the difference.
Absolutely. No, I think that the sort of like, what's the word? It's not repression, but smearing of Black Lives Matter came at that I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for this kind of smear campaign on all types of levels that would come with, this really powerful name that really triggered, mostly white folks, mostly media.
Right.
And I do think there was a purposeful confusion. And I agree, it was always, I was always like, this is very simple. Not sure why
Right.
this
It was
is
simple to me too.
so confusing. But, I also think the other thing is that if you're dealing with a media that's mostly white and doesn't understand Black people, they are, a lot of times the media was genuinely confused.
Right.
They're like, well, you're Black. Doesn't that mean you're a Black Lives Matter activist?
Right.
Like,
But you used the hashtag.
Exactly.
Right,
They couldn't see the nuance. And that was a sign of a number of things. One, just white media not understanding Black shit.
And not trying to.
But then two, media not understanding movement history and not having a sense of like, oh, this is a social movement and there's a long history of this, and not knowing how to differentiate. And I'm pretty sure, the Panthers also dealt with that.
Right.
Everybody was a Panther.
Right. And then there were splits within the Panthers.
Exactly.
Yeah. That phrase, Black Lives Matter, it makes perfect sense to me. But again, I'm a Black man. So obviously I feel like my own life matters, right? And obviously I feel like, well, until Black Lives Matter, all lives can't possibly matter until Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely.
But Black Lives Matter, such a efficient phrase.
Yes.
That it triggered people to create All Lives Matter
Yes.
and Blue Lives Matter. Did you understand how triggering it would be?
No.
Okay.
I didn't realize it was going to have such a guttural response.
Yeah.
Like that it was going to kick up like white supremacist ancestors, like I did not realize it was going to be so intense. And that, I remember when Black Lives Matter went viral and then All Lives Matter going viral after that. And that sort of like, it was almost like a knee-jerk response for mostly white people, but also some non-Black POC folks. I had to have a lot of talk with my non-Black
And
POC
Black
friends.
folks.
And it was
Yes,
another divide.
and Black folks for sure.
I feel like they did that just because, like, they saw that we were coming together, that Black people were saying Black Lives Matter, and it's like, okay, you guys are getting a little bit too chummy. Let's go ahead and throw a little wrench in it,
Yep.
and then start saying All Lives Matter, and then people think, oh, well, I love all lives. And it's like, you don't have to specify that all lives. We all know that everybody's lives matter, but the
Exactly.
problem is that Black people are not mattering in the world. So that's why we needed to have it, and it used to really drive me crazy when I heard other Black people literally trying to argue about that,
Yes.
and I had to end up unfollowing a lot of people over that.
Absolutely.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a trial in Louisiana where they were trying to say, this is where they're starting to say Black Lives Matter is a terrorist org.
Yeah.
And I think D-Ray was involved in it. And again,
and us, too.
they're calling him, and you said, what?
BLM too,
Yeah, and
the co-founders and
Right, and they were saying that they were trying to blame y'all for violence.
Yeah, in Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge, and then the Dallas situation. This guy in Dallas, when he was talking to the police, he said, I'm mad about police brutality and I'm mad about Black Lives Matter. Mad about Black Lives Matter is a very strange phrase, right?
Why are you mad? Why
Right?
does that anger you?
And I studied this guy a little bit, and he was trying to make his way into certain liberation movements. The more sort of fringe movements, it seemed like he
Absolutely.
was attracted to. But even the more fringe movements, from what I could tell, had pushed him away from what I
Yes.
read. But like, nah, like there's pictures of him with people that I know.
Yep.
Then I'm like, I know you,
Yeah.
you was hanging out with that guy.
Yeah.
But then, these people I knew was like, nah, like he was too wild for us. You know what I'm saying? That became a turning point. Like when I argue with white supremacists online, to this day.
To this day.
Right. In 2019. Right? For real. A little. In 2019, they're still saying Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group because of Dallas.
Yes.
And then the FBI declared that y'all were Black identity extremists. What's that?
I don't know. They made it up.
They made it up. Right?
It was like the
Anything to
first time
keep
I
us
had
down.
heard. I was like,
Right.
I remember when that got leaked because you remember we weren't supposed to see that, and it was leaked, and it was, there's a new form of extremism. They said, and it was called Black identity extremist. And that's literally a name that the FBI made up to further criminalize Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, and so your book is called When They Call You a Terrorist. Our history of people standing up, when you stand up to the status quo in that way, you're called a terrorist. Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
Malcolm X, all of them. Is there any, how did that impact your life? Being called a Black identity extremist and being called a terrorist by large segments of the population?
Well, I was pregnant during this time because, I don't know, I decided to get pregnant in the middle of an uprising.
Hey, man, the best time. Revolutionary love.
Exactly. And so I was pregnant during that time, of really the height of the vitriol against us. And when I look back, we were all scared. It was very scary. It didn't stop us, but it was sobering. It was very sobering. And I think, the personal impact, it's why I wrote a memoir. I wasn't trying to write a memoir. I wasn't that interested. I actually got asked to write the book in 2015. I said, no, thanks. I'm on the front lines. I don't need to write books. And then they called us a terrorist organization. And then I was like, oh, I definitely need to write something. Yeah, I need to intervene on this narrative.
Toni Morrison told Angela Davis, you have to write your story.
That's exactly right. When I watched that doc, I was like, wow. And Angela did the foreword to my book, and we're really, she's a very close friend and mentor of mine. And we had met way before BLM. I met her when I was I've been in this movement since I was 16, so I met her in my early 20s.
Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, fam. But, I think it was sobering, and it was also, it's not personal. Like you said, the long list of our folks who fought for freedom that were then labeled as terrorist or communist, enemy of the people, basically, enemy of the state. And so once I started to remember and internalize, like, this is actually not personal. This is very political.
Right.
And to really make sure what I would say to this next generation, this younger generation of activists, and I say it a lot, there's two big things: is take care of yourself, because this is a long road. But I also say protect yourself.
Because I was just about to ask you, because we talk a lot about mental health, and when you have all of these people relying on you and you're going up against what are some things that you do to protect yourself specifically so people know?
Well, I mean, something very basic that we didn't do at the beginning is just have security. We were out here traveling the country alone, solo,
right.
And I remember us having conversations with elders in the movement and them being like, where's your security? We'd be like, oh, you go from being an activist in your neighborhood and then all of a sudden the world knows you, and then all of a sudden white supremacists know you. And that's a hard sort of psychological shift. And so security became really important for us. And then also cybersecurity, which old heads don't know anything about. They didn't have to deal with what we're dealing with.
Right.
So we had to really work with cyber experts and learn, just how to be safer online. And then I think, the last piece is I believe, every Black person, part of our reparations package, we should have a therapist, a competent Black therapist. Every one of us should be able to I do acupuncture, I'm from LA, so there's all this weird shit here. And so I believe in it. And I tell everybody get Reiki, get acupuncture, get massage, because it literally is a long haul. Angela Davis works out every single morning. She does yoga every single day. That's the time, there's so much happening to us. We have to have the time to take care of ourselves too.
Now, you produced a play.
Yeah, I did.
That centers around self-care.
Yeah.
You tell us about this play.
I produced a play called, My Respite, Reprieve, and Healing,
Okay.
my last performance. I just graduated with my MFA in performance from USC. The other part of my life is being an artist. Thanks.
Yay.
And my solo show was an hour and 10-minute piece, really looking at Black people and our health. And there was a piece that I did called Hair Wash, where 13 Black folks got their hair washed in public wearing white robes with honey and salt. And there's a part of the piece I did was sitting in a old 100-year-old bathtub full of salt, 400 pounds of salt on me that I climbed out of, and then went into a bathtub of coconut milk. And it was this really...
I've seen these pictures.
Yes.
You look very relaxed.
Yes.
Sounds relaxing.
Everybody should bathe in coconut milk, I'm just telling you.
Where do you put it? Do you just pour it into the bathtub?
Yeah, I just poured it. I got coconut milk powder, protein powder, but coconut milk, and then stirred it in. It was outside. It was an outside performance. But it was this, it was the weight of this work, what it means to sort of release yourself, and then what it means to have the agency to take care of yourself.
Right. another criticism. So the two main criticisms of Black Lives Matter was why all these women and these queer women taking over our movement and making life harder. The other criticism is George Soros funds Black Lives Matter. Who is George Soros, and why do people think that he invented and started and funds Black Lives Matter?
Well, George Soros, I've never met you. I really hope you can fund us. You have a lot of money. It would be really helpful. Let me tell you about this myth that clearly now we know that some purposeful troll created.
Yeah, the Soros thing is, Soros is someone who funds.
Yeah, he's a big funder. He's a huge
Yeah,
funder.
and so he's the right wing and the alt rights or whatever they call them online.
Yes.
They have this anti-George Soros
Absolutely.
campaign, and Roseanne Barr got in trouble. Like when she said the thing about Valerie Jarrett,
Right.
the subplot was the George Soros thing, and she had to apologize because she's at least smart enough to know that I got caught telling a lie.
Absolutely.
She said he was a Nazi, which is their thing.
Yes.
But yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. George Soros is a huge, major funder. He's a philanthropist
Of
a lot of things.
right, because you have the Koch brothers. Coke, is that how you say? it?
Yeah, Coke.
Koch brothers,
Yeah.
right? They're huge funders too.
Yes.
But they fund very different things than Soros.
Precisely. Soros funds criminal justice reform work, like hands down. That's what, and he was funding it before it was like the cool thing to fund.
Right, and he was raised in Nazi Germany, and his family had to escape, right?
Yes.
And so that's part of his story why he's always been for progressive causes.
That's exactly right. And he's been behind a lot of funding of the progressive DA races across the country. He has a thing called the Soros Fellowship. Lots of my friends have done it. But this myth of George Soros sort of creating Black Lives Matter and then funding us, it was one of the most fascinating, because I was in Europe on my book tour 2 years ago, and I went to this small town in Britain, and I was so excited. I'm sitting with a group of Black people, and this woman says to me, after we're all done introducing ourselves, she goes, I really need to understand this, how I want to know why you're funded by George Soros. And I was like, all the way in the UK.
Yeah.
And
It's the most pervasive thing. Like the thing I hear the most about Black Lives Matter,
It's George-
more than anything, is
right.
George Soros.
He started it, and he's funding us, and we're puppets of his.
Yes.
I think that was started by the right, clearly. I also I wasn't fully sophisticated around the right wing reach before this moment, right? I didn't know what Breitbart was.
Yeah, and Breitbart is very important because Steve Bannon and them set out to start rumors like that.
Absolutely.
Right.
And they created that and then, when Bill O'Reilly was on air, really amplified that,
Right. And a lot of people in our community, in the
Absolutely.
conscious
Yeah.
YouTube
Yes.
community,
Yes.
latched onto those right-wing rumors
Yo.
and sunk their teeth into them.
One of the first places where that rumor got banned inside the Black radical left was the Black Agenda Report.
Yeah.
They said that we were sort of liberal Democrats. We were co-opting the left. And it was really disheartening because not one of those folks ever sat with us, called us, talked to us. And those types of rumors, I think that those things are the scariest for me in these moments, because the internet, you literally can't tell what's real and what's fake.
Right.
And
Post-truth.
Yes.
It's not about the truth. It's about winning this argument.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question,
Yeah.
and I know people might hate me for this, but okay. So Kim Kardashian is really in the different court systems, getting people released, doing
for
a
her.
lot. Like, so has she ever reached out to work with BLM, or have you?
I don't think we would work with her. Like, I think
okay.
it's good. Everybody has their lanes. Like, I'm whenever someone's getting free from prison, I'm like, thank God.
Word
So
up.
I'm so glad that she's doing that work and that she's using her celebrity in that way. But I don't think we need to work with Kim Kardashian. I think everybody is sort of figuring out what their lane is for criminal justice reform in particular. If she called and was like, I'd like to do something, we could put her to work for sure. But I think she's like kind of focused on what she's doing. So, for example, like Jane Fonda, I'm really close friends with Jane, and she's obviously been ride or die for a long time. And what I love about Jane is she's always like, you tell me what to do.
Right.
What is the best place for me?
She learned that the hard way too. I just watched this documentary about her.
Remember the 5-part
Yeah.
documentary?
Yeah, I watched. Yeah, she went through she went through a learning process. She put
really
her career on the
did.
line.
She really
was
did.
looked at as un-American.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's everybody. what I'm excited about, it is now popular to be against the prison system. That was not the case when I was a child.
And you brought me back to, I was talking earlier and I lost my train of thought earlier, but now I remember what I was trying to get at when I was talking about Cornel West getting arrested on purpose, and why I brought up Action Support Committee, because I started talking, and then they clapped, they gave me props for it, and threw me off. And what I was trying to get to was, we raised the money and more, Missouri Organization for Reform and Empowerment.
Oh yeah, more, yes.
They got the most of the money.
Yes.
And it's because what I was told from the people was, we need to bail people out of jail.
Yeah.
Josh was a name that kept coming. Bail, free Josh, bail Josh out was a rallying cry, right?
Yeah.
But then some of the pushback I got, and you can please walk me through this, is that when you're raising money to bail people out, that money's going back into the police.
Yeah.
And they're using it to buy, batons and
To beat us
stuff.
with.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and so is that true?
Well, yes and no. The bail system is fucked up. I mean, we have a terrible bail system, and the fact that you are basically being held on ransom, that's what's happening. People are going into prisons and jails, and people are going into jails, not prisons. People are going into jails, and they're being forced to pay for their own freedom. When you work with that money does go directly into the carceral system.
Right.
And that is the problematic part about bail, right?
Right.
And in Los Angeles alone, the bail system doesn't make $1 million, doesn't make $1 billion. It's $1 trillion industry in Los Angeles alone. So yeah, and it's $1 trillion industry that's feeding something that is crushing Black communities every single day.
Right. So now with restorative justice and dealing with the prisons, I'm someone who, like most Americans, grew up in a world, and like most people in the world, grew up in a world where prison is just a reality, right? You do something bad, you go to prison. And then when you start dealing with this level of activism work and criminal justice reform, it starts to, your thinking starts to shift, and you start to be like, well, is prison the best thing? Is prison actually rehabilitating people? What are the alternatives to prison?
Sorry, because I'm about to have a cough attack.
I know, I got so distracted. I was like, what is that?
It's always the set air.
I got my hoodie on.
That's
for a
why
reason.
we dress warm. They always ask, like, why are we dressed warm on this set?
Okay. So, I mean, this is what I always tell people. Number one, we didn't always have prisons. We didn't always have police. We didn't always have court systems. And we really kind of live in a society where Americans and the U.S. has amnesia. We think what happened yesterday or what happened today is the truth for thousands of years. And my argument to people is, if we actually look at the jail and prison population, the majority of people that are in those in jail cells are people who are mentally ill, who are drug addicted, who've dealt with domestic violence. There's a lot of children inside jails. We talk a lot about the children at the border, and I'm grateful. We're not talking about the children in juvenile hall. And so this kind of conversation about who is in our system is rarely talked about. Because when you start, especially as an abolitionist, that's what I identify as, the first thing people ask is, what about the rapists and the murderers? And I always say, let's just take a pause. I want to just have a different conversation. What about people with mental illness? What about people who are homeless? What do we do with those people? And so if we were to, in Los Angeles alone, the women in jails, 90% of the women could be diverted out of that jail.
Wow, that's a huge number.
So it actually,
that's like all of them.
Exactly. So it actually means that our jails are de facto shelters. They're de facto mental health institutions. It's where people that are homeless get most of their care, whether that's dental, health, and it's subpar. It's subpar care. So it's not real care. And so the question becomes, why are we investing in this system? We should actually be divesting from it and be creating true alternatives, holistic alternatives for people.
All right, so I'm a huge fan of Jay-Z, and we all know about his recent deal with the NFL. And we also know that he's been a huge advocate for Black Lives Matter, and he's really divided a lot of activists, a lot of the community in half, like some for him and some against him. So what are your thoughts on it? What do you think his game plan is going to be?
Well, I don't know what his game plan is going to be, but I just think he crossed the picket line. And in one of the most major ways, I think the first thing I did was like I went to Ness, which is Kaepernick's girlfriend's page. I went to Cap's page, just to see. Wait, are they in on this? Like, and it was very clear that no, that wasn't that wasn't a deal that they brokered together. And I think it's unfortunate. It's not like Jay-Z needs the money or the fame, and so I think it was an unfortunate choice. It's not a choice that I agree with. And yeah, he's been incredibly supportive to BLM financially. Him and Beyonce have been really, really good to movement folks. But I feel a lot of bitterness towards that choice, mostly because I'm watching Cap out here trying to figure it out. And I feel like he crossed the picket line.
Jay-Z, in trying to defend himself, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think he feels like you said, we all know that he's been gracious and supportive of movement work, and even in his art, with documentaries and things that he's funded. His thing was, Cap was kneeling to bring attention to an issue. Now that we know the issue, well, what is the solution to solve the issue? And he feels like, as a capitalist, that his solution is to partner with the NFL and do social justice work and have the NFL have someone like Jay-Z, who, in his mind, I know the people and I speak for the people and the people trust me. What do you have to say to what he said to defend himself?
I just don't agree with him politically.
Right.
I literally think it's a different political paradigm. And I don't know what it feels like to be a billionaire and to think. And
some people say that to be a billionaire, it's hard to be a decent person. Exactly. Or to be a billionaire, you get used to doing business with people that you don't agree with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a slap in the face. I haven't spoke on it publicly because I've just been like, I've been balanced trying to figure it out and like trying to see like, okay, does he have a game plan? But I'm with you also. It's like a slap in the face to a lot of people that have been protesting. And I was literally, Jamel came in here and she told me that we were allowed to watch NFL and I was about to play fantasy football. And then this happened and I saw, how I felt. I'm like, oh, damn, I still can't watch NFL. Like, it's still not changing. For him to say, like, we're past kneeling, it's like, we're not past it because it's still happening. Like,
absolutely,
you don't have to get a check in order to change something. And he doesn't need the money. There's other ways that he can, make change without selling out, for the lack of better words.
It's just such a controversial situation, like the NFL and what it's done, not just to Cap, but just the industry that we've now seen be revealed. So to make that choice, that was not an easy like, he had to really think about it.
Yeah.
He had to have several meetings. Like, that was a choice that was very intentional.
I'm glad you brought up Jamel. I really liked Jamel's piece in The Atlantic about Jay-Z and the NFL, because I think she nailed it, because I think she acknowledged what Jay-Z is and what Jay-Z could be potentially in the situation, but she also said that she felt like, I think the crux of her piece was, the NFL is getting more
absolutely
than Jay-Z is getting.
Yeah, because Jay-Z has so many followers, and obviously the protest was working because they needed to fix something, and instead of fixing the problem, like, oh, let's just get the king of the blacks, and it's like, we don't have
he got tokenized, and that's the thing. It's like, I think this is because it becomes tricky when you're black or woman or queer at the margins, and then you work with a major corporation or company. Who is going to gain more? Absolutely, the NFL gained more.
Yeah. You started your foray into activism, as far as I know, with the Bus Riders Union. Can you tell us about the Bus Riders Union? And while telling us about it, can you sort of give people advice on how to get involved in activism? I try to divert attention to activists. That's why I love you so much. Because people come at me and be like, you're, conscious rap. I'm like, oh, you like me? Wait till you hear about Patrisse Cullors. I love being able to do that. So can you sort of give people a way that they can sort of start this work?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm lucky that I started this work before like Twitter and Facebook, because I think some people think that is the work. And sure, social media is like a real online world, but people need to join things, join an organization. What are you most interested in, excited about, pissed off about? Find an organization that's doing that and join it. If there's nothing out there, make one. But I think part of being an activist is actually joining something. And before 45 was elected, You know, Black Lives Matter was basically being like, we're in a state of emergency. If we don't deal with the political crisis, we are going to end up ... And then 45 was elected.
Right.
And then a bunch of people were like, oh, shit.
Right.
The world is blowing up. And Black people
Right.
were like, no, it's actually been like this.
Right. I see the connection as well.
But
Yes.
that's why I'm happy that 45 was elected, because it's getting more people on our side and it's opening more people's eyes. And it's like, it's not just our fight, it's all of your fight. If you don't have money, then you're on the same side that we are.
Well, I get your point, but happiness is not a feeling that I. But
I'm
I get your
not
point.
happy.
I get your
You know what
point.
I mean? I'm not happy about it.
45 was asked about reparations.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't see it happening. Do you see reparations happening for Black people in America? Not just Black people in America, but CARICOM and all these other organizations all over the diaspora. Do you see reparations happening for Black people in your lifetime?
Absolutely.
And how
I
do we
do.
get there?
We organize, and I think the fact that we're hearing reparations on the national stage right now has everything to do with all the years and years of work that's happened to get us there. I think, you know, we've already won reparations in some places, like Chicago won reparations.
We're talking about Oakland with the.
Exactly. So reparations is happening at a smaller scale. I don't know, honestly, I don't know personally if it needs to happen at the national scale. I think it needs to happen local by local, state by state, city by city. I think we're going to get the most out of reparations if we do it in our own communities. And people always think that
Small government reparations.
yes. And people always think that national is like if we win something nationally, that's the best thing. That's not always true. Sometimes you can win something nationally and it never trickles down to the local.
Like what happened in Ferguson. With the
Precisely.
national organizations coming into Ferguson
Yes.
and the local people not getting the money.
That's right. So I think local reparations is a goal that I think many organizers should sort of orient themselves around.
I like that.
Me too.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Patrisse Cullors.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
y'all.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Listen to the jump.